well as helping most. So this slide, this is quite simple really. What he's saying was he was looking at PPI at a strategic level, looking at governance, funding bodies, advisory bodies, executive boards, and in the individual projects. So he had questions which are listed here. So they were basically, has the research institution got a strategy for PPI? When did they make it? Are they implementing it? How and why did the institution decide to do PPI? Do the people at the strategic level know what's going on at the grassroots level? Do you know what's happening in all your projects? And what's been your experience of trying to implement PPI? So they went to the meeting, they had this conversation, which went, as you can imagine, all over the place. No two meetings were the same. He took notes from those meetings and then analysed them when he got back and rated them. So he was looking at these 4 different elements. So if there's a strategy, have they got a plan for implementing it? Are they monitoring that? If they've got patients involved, what stages are they involved in? How are they supporting involvement? And what are the attitudes of the people, the senior people who are leading this? And on each of those dimensions, he could give them a score of 4. So if people were doing, the best possible PPI, they'd get a score of 16. So here's the ratings. Again, I'm not going to try and pronounce the names of the places, but you can see there's regions, hospitals, universities, and a range of schools. So I think what's clear from the kind of overall picture is the highest score was around about 7 out of 16. So still a lot of development work to be done. And also such huge variation. So, there were some patches of people doing really excellent stuff and some patches where people still needed a lot of help to get going. He also talked to about 50 different projects, and that included a wide range of topics. But his main interest was what was happening at the strategic level. And what was interesting is actually most of the people at the top didn't know what was happening at the grassroots level. There was a real kind of disconnect between the two. So the results of the mapping have been published in an article in the Danish Medical Journal, which is equivalent to our BMJ. And the next piece of work is saying, okay, so there's a lot of work to be done to support and develop PPI. Where do we go next? And to sort of think about that, Moses has been looking at the questions that the researchers were asking during those conversations. And they're listed on the next few slides. They'll be very familiar to you. Who should we involve? How do we recruit and train people? What types of research should they be involved in, including basic research? What's the role of the researcher in this? What are the differences between PPI, participatory research, co-design, co-production? And what's the difference between PPI and qualitative research? That was a question I was getting asked a lot. And how do we make it ethical? How do we evaluate and document the value of PPI? Is it going to change our methods? Are we going to have to do everything the patients tell us? Was one of the questions. And so this is a highly specialised technical endeavour. So can patients do this? Is another question. And how do we just make sure we're not just sitting, observing us, having conversations, and make it realistic and meaningful? So none of those questions are going to be a surprise to you, I'm sure. There's ones I come across all the time, talking to researchers in the UK as well. So there was nothing uniquely Danish about this. There's nothing about the Danish context that's different. The only thing that came up was actually it's quite difficult to translate the word involvement into Danish. What's the right? But that's a problem we've been talking about already. That language issue, engagement, involvement, etc., is common to all. So I don't think there's anything uniquely Danish about this. So where do we go with this? We know that it's really patchy. We know that researchers are struggling to do it. The momentum is gathering. So last year, 2017, it became part of the national research policy. So this was a statement, user involvement should be part of strategic research in Denmark. And by strategic research, they're meaning research to improve care and to improve services. So applied research rather than basic science. So it needs to be part of that element. And also, since there's like a national dementia research strategy, which has a strong PPI component, and MONS is part of the board overseeing that strategy. So that there's gathering momentum, but we need to do something about improving the quality of involvement. And what MONS is interested in is applying the principles of quality development to this. So bringing researchers together with different levels of experience to learn from each other, to map and evaluate the work that they're doing. And he's thinking the primary driver needs to be the researcher, not in the way that the researcher has all the power over this and the decisions, but that there's a limit to what top-down instruction can do, and actually how do we develop that bottom-up enthusiasm and make it something that researchers want to do than something they have to do. And the other issue to address is this gap between what's happening at strategic level and what's happening at grassroots level. How do we join that up so it's meaningful? There's been another paper about this in terms of medicines development, where the policymakers and regulators, their expectations of what they should be doing is very different to the health researchers and the health professionals. So there is this mismatch. And I also see this in relation to patient involvement. So with some of the institutions I work with, there's patients involved at the project level who then get asked to sit on a board, but the distinction between those roles isn't always clear for them, and how they should contribute maybe in different ways. What does good involvement in research governance look like? What's a good outcome in research involvement in research governance? A lot of the work done in involvement so far has been very much research project-based, not at this kind of strategic level. So I think that's another area that needs some work. And then this issue of, well, how do we motivate and encourage researchers to want to do this? It's about engaging with their values, what's important to them as individuals. A lot of the time we talk to researchers about how their involvement will improve research, but how will it help them? And we had a lot of conversations about how even if you spend a lot of time doing involvement as a researcher, there's no recognition or reward for that work. So how can we have more carrot to go along with the stick? I guess that's a big question. Okay. Am I on time? I've done that bit quick.
Thank you, Christina.
Okay.
It was so quick. Everyone was
That's
waiting for more, actually. So our second speaker is Tyler Kroll. He is Associate Dean for Research at the University College Dublin. Tyler, you will be talking about the PPI Ignite project. Here you go. Yes.
Well, thank you and good morning. So it's a great honor and pleasure to be here, and I'm very appreciative of the invitation. So first of all, I think I need to clarify something about that title there, because it relates to one particular school in our institution. And so I'm based in the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health Systems, but I'm sort of the lead for the PPI Ignite program at that particular university, and I explain a little bit what that means. So public and patient involvement in Ireland is a fairly novel phenomenon. I'm not talking about necessarily the grassroots level. I think researchers have probably worked collaboratively with patients and the public in a number of fields and over the years, but it's not very visible, it's not very articulate, and there has not been until recently a strategic emphasis on PPI from policymakers, from funders. But that's changing rapidly, and I think it's changing also against the background of how Ireland is changing in general. It's becoming a much more collaborative, open, transparent society, I think, where people are engaged much more in policy making and in referenda, as you may have followed in the news. So one of the drivers in Ireland is the Irish Health Research Forum. And that's a collaboration that was initiated by the Medical Charities Research Group I would say similar, or has some similarities with Involve in some charities and patient organizations across the Republic of Ireland. And so they had several consultation exercises and defined sort of PPI as occurring when individuals meaningfully and actively collaborate in the governance, priority setting, conduct of research, as well as in summarizing, distributing, sharing, and applying its resulting knowledge. So as you can see from the date of the publication, it's very new, so just a document that just came out this year and has been probably worked on for the last couple of years. So another driver, as I said, so is the funding environment, which is also changing rapidly. So the HRB, sort of our NIHR, so it's the Health Research Board, that has undertaken a survey and consultation exercise over the past couple of years. And so it was the first funding agency really in the field of health and social care research that in Ireland that has created an implementation plan to support PPI. So it's not only a strategic plan, but an implementation plan, both within the funding agency, but also through HRB-funded projects. And they also reflected that in their strategic plan, Research Evidence Action 2016 to 2020, so that recognizes patients and the public as partners in health research. And you see the word culture there, and I think that is very important, I think, for the HRB and for us in Ireland at the moment, to change really that culture of engagement. And that, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So the HRB itself, the funding agency, has run a pilot with a peer review through members of the public of HRB applications, grant applications in just last year. And now they have the aim really to implement it from 2020 regularly in funding decisions. So they're moving quite rapidly on all areas. So this is really the change in the research culture from deciding for and doing for to deciding with and doing together. And that's sort of the context we find ourselves in at the moment. So the HRB has funded then the Public Patient Involvement IGNITE initiative. So the word IGNITE actually reflects very well where we are at the moment. So we're at the beginning, but there's sort of a kickstart and an ignition of this process to promote really PPI in health and social care research, and to build sort of capacity and capabilities, this learning in Irish academic settings in partnership with community organizations. So, and I'm speaking today on behalf of one organization, but also on behalf of all 5 in some ways. But if you just bear with me, because I can only probably give you some snapshot of the institution that I'm representing, the University College Dublin. But there are members of all other 4 universities here at this conference, and please speak to them about their program of work in depth. We heard a little bit yesterday from several speakers already. Virginia Minogue talked about the ethical implications and the legal implications in one of the sessions, and she works very closely with University of Limerick. We have representatives here from DCU, and of course Mary Galvin, who spoke yesterday for Trinity College and their PPI initiative. So all these 5 universities have slightly different emphasis of their work and how they approach it. But today I'm just mostly talking about the UCD PPI IGNITE initiative. So the call that came out in 2016 really asked us to work with up to 10 partners, and see here the UCD PPI partners. There is a mix of patient organizations such as Spinal Injuries Ireland, Cystic Fibrosis Ireland, umbrella organizations such as the Disability Federation Ireland that covers a number of disability groups, but also Family Carers Ireland with focus on family caregiving, or SAGE, which is an advocacy organization for older people. We also work with a group of librarians who are very keen on promoting sort of health literacy across public health libraries or libraries in the Dublin area. And we work with the Health Experience Research Group at the University of Oxford and the Platform for Patient Involvement at the business and patient, I never get the acronym right, POSI, which is a very driver in Ireland to work with a number of on the patient education side for clinical trials primarily. And the Ireland East Hospital Group, which is a large consortium of 11 hospitals in the east of Ireland. And double assignment, not to forget, works with the homeless community and people with mental health challenges. So there are three intersecting pillars of work, as in the call alluded to. So we want to really capture best PPI research practice and transfer them into practice, and that's something why we're also here to learn. The capacity and capability, we want to train our students and staff members to do it better and do it well. And we want to learn and share our learning across a knowledge network, and both within Ireland and hopefully in collaboration with our international partners. So we're nearly at the end of year one. So this is how we organize our application. So year one is exploration and mapping. What's really going on in our institution and how do we work on PPI? Year two will be much more focused on the training and development aspects. And year three to really think about sustainable implementation and across Ireland as well as in our institution. But we've done a little bit of all of these things, I think, already in year one. And I'm talking a little bit about the activities now. So we have internally focused activities on the institution at UCD, and those are, for instance, we found out that there are a number of people already working in pockets, of engaged work, and we thought it makes sense actually to bring all these people together and to create a map. First of all, a working group that collaborates of these champions of engaged working with communities and patient members. So we're working with a group called Campus Engage, UCD in the community, and we work with a number of public engagement champions who are already there. And then we started mapping through a census day all the PPI and PE activities across the university. So we had different stall stations across the university. On one particular day, we asked people about their experiences. And we also had workshops where we invite members across the university to agree joint definition and refine with input from the public on a subsequent public facing event, science festival, our definition. And I'll show you the definition in a moment. We also linked together a group of people who are already working very well, I think, in engaged ways. We have patient voice networks focused on particular clinical conditions in cancer and diabetes and arthritis. Those groups are doing tremendous work, and we wanted to learn from them, and we wanted to enable that they also share their learning of how to do things in a meaningful and purposeful way. And we started a number of short life working groups, very essential, how we actually work with our institution to get PPI recognized in HR, in the ethics committees, in finance in relation to PPI. How do we process honorary contracts? How do we expedite finances and reimbursements? What are the ethical implications of having co-researchers, for instance, on the board? And we brought it all together in a preliminary report that is then presented to the senior management team of the university. So this is our working definition at the moment. For public engagement, including PPI, describes the many ways that UCD's research, teaching, contribution to society are influenced by and shared with the public for mutual learning. So very much a dynamic definition that has gone through several iterations, and it helps us so far to think about PPI and public engagement. This is our working framework. We adopted the onion of the Wellcome Trust, and we turned it into an avocado. And so it's a different type of vegetable. It's a vegetable fruit. Anyway, and we see here basically layers of what engagement could mean. So on the right-hand side, the traditional, more informal, informational-oriented ways of working, one-directional, and on the left, the dialogue, the actual co-design, the shared decision-making, the partnership. And so further internally focused activities continue as we speak. So we have grant application support. We work with UCD Research to embed PPI really into all seldom heard groups and into focus. And we have some concerns about how we do that under fair data policy and data protection legislation to the HRB Open. And we also have a paper accepted at the moment that focuses on the mechanisms that enable reciprocal involvement of seldom heard groups in health and social care research. So that's coming forward very soon. So externally, we're working with a number of partners and have spun off a number of initiatives. PIPIN is PPI, Pediatric Intensive Care, that's taken forward by a number of pediatric clinicians in collaboration with our research team and members of the public in pediatric care, intensive care units. Raindrop, a rare disease network starting next year. And then we have seed funding schemes that I mentioned. For instance, we're working, one of the examples includes the collaboration with the Client Action Group of the Dublin Simon community, who are at the moment working on a project, Home Away from Home, so they get money from us. It's the clients that develop that project, and we're supporting them with learning, training, and methodology, and so on as they go along. We also host a winter school in next year on conducting PPI with seldom heard groups. So in terms of evaluation and metrics, well, the 5 institutions have chosen slightly different approaches, but we have also agreed a number of some approaches that we do together. One is, as I mentioned, Campus Engage has already done quite a bit of work in Ireland on engaged work, so it would be in a way silly of us to reinvent the wheel. So they have already developed a number of metrics, and as you can see along these building blocks, or these blocks that you see there, they might be reminiscent of this Sustainable Development Goals, and that's intentional. So we're linking PPI also to the Sustainable Development Goals to see, how we can report them effectively in those areas. So it transcends to the narrow focus of health, but it goes probably into the wider area of how PPI can contribute to changes in society as a whole in these key areas. And there are metrics attached to the approach that Campus Engage has taken, and that has been published just this year, so we're following that closely. We're also working with our funder and have agreed these 5 domains for metrics that we would capture across the 5 institutions. So what we do in terms of awareness buildings, and these are just the top headings, and then there are sort of metrics underneath. What we do in terms of capacity building and training, what we do in terms of PPI and practice, policy and product development, and cultural changes, and how we grow our international and collaborative partnerships and move towards a national PPI network. So that was the whistle-stop tour across the program, and please visit all the other programs, and by all means look at one of these posters. This is one example of our patient voice and arthritis colleagues. And so I conclude basically, it's very novel, and we have a lot to learn, but we're on the way, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tyler. So our next speaker is Dave Green. He's a PPI research partner here with researchers in Newcastle. You will be presenting on the UK PPI perspective on evaluation. So thank you, Dave.
Okay, great, yeah. Yes, I do, yes. At least I hope I do. Excellent, okay. Well, good morning. I have to admit that the last time I did a presentation, I thought I'd be extremely clever in my introduction, and I told the audience that it was a pleasure to present to an audience which was fantastically more intelligent than I was. And while the rest of the audience were shaking their heads in disbelief. There was a researcher in the front who was nodding vigorously in agreement, which that's when reality met ego and reality won. Okay, about a month ago we held a workshop. We invited the public to the workshop. Most of the public had been involved in research. It was a one-day workshop and we were discussing the impacts of PPI on research. We did have some difficulty, however, in deciding exactly what impacts were. We used a small group discussion technique called Nominal group technique, which actually involves talking in small groups to reach a decision. It's a process where participants first complete the exercise individually, following which all the ideas are pooled and therefore considered into the next stage. It must be fairly simple because I've managed to produce, I hope, which is a reasonable slide. It's basically a way of stopping dominant voices setting the agenda and giving a sort of democratization to the whole technique. This process generated 25 impacts that were discussed with the full group after lunch and reduced to 8 key impacts, which I shall talk about in a moment. We did, in the opening bit of the workshop, deal with discussions about thoughts on evaluation, but we thought we would focus on impacts, and that's what we actually have done. The workshop was attended by 44 PPI partners. There was a good balance of gender. They were generally white British. A majority were retired, and although there were some young members did attend. We did an online follow-up exercise. Having completed the ranking exercise in the workshop, we also discussed limitations such as the order of presentation, and members suggested that we rerun the exercise again, presenting the impacts in random order, which we actually did. The exercise was completed by 21 of the workshop delegates, and those are the demographics of that particular group. Right, on to the impacts. Firstly, focusing on health benefits for patients and public. Many members of the public have experienced user services and particular conditions for themselves, or they have been carers of patients who have. And these experiences have a direct impact on research. For instance, if I suffer from diabetes, which mercifully I don't, I have an experience of that condition and also the user services which makes me an expert in that condition. So on the research team, I am the expert on that particular condition. And so that focuses the research on the patient need. Makes research more relevant. Public involvement can mean that researchers are made more aware of what actually matters to the public and not so much to researchers. In another context, and this actually held up with the research application which I looked at, the research application was actually on a particular condition, and the researchers had focused on life expectancy. That brought in some PPI members to have a look at the research application, and the members said, yeah, sure, we are very interested in extending our life, but what we really want is to enhance the quality of our life. Can you change the project to meet those needs? The researcher did, and thus the patients had a direct impact on where that research project went. PPI also has an effect on the language of research, making this much more relevant and accessible to the public. It's doubtful actually whether you'll get funding for PPI for any project unless you actually do have PPI. And by PPI I do mean good quality PPI. adds a different perspective. The public are not researchers. I've been involved in research for about 12 years now, and one thing I've come to realize is that I am not a researcher. In fact, I think writing a research project is top of my bucket list of 10 things I definitely do not want to do before I die. We are really there to bring an informed, non-specialist perspective to research which complements the expertise of that research team, by not only helping to find the right subject for research, but by commenting on specific issues of research. A team leader once said to me, Dave, he said, among other things, you are here to keep us grounded in reality, which I took as a compliment, as my grasp on reality is fairly tenuous at the best of times. Encourages a sustained and growing involvement. I'd like to develop that theme in a little while. Promotes a richer understanding of research. The more that PPI is involved in research means, of course, that the public who are directly involved become more aware of the opportunities and the challenges of research. But that, informed, if you like, adds a ripple effect so that research comes to be part of the public discourse. It also means that researchers and the public, to use a horribly well-worn cliche, get to walk in each other's shoes, leading hopefully to a greater mutual respect and understanding. Helps recognize the needs of participants. While the public are part of the research team with the same status as any other member of the research team, they do have special needs. We need to be presented information in plain English, we need to be included in face-to-face meetings, and we also need to tackle the problem, sorry, we don't use the word problem, the challenge of payment. If you are on benefits or you pay tax, then you do have particular challenges there which have to be addressed. Helps clarify and define PPI. PPI is an evolving entity. As roles and skills develop, so what the public can actually do will change and evolve. The change not only gives greater clarity to PPI, but explores roles and responsibilities. It's also a process of building the profile of PPI within research. Promotes culture shift. I should hope to deal with that in a second. Now, I reckon if you ran this workshop in any other part of the country, you would probably get totally different results, which really just emphasizes the difficulty and the challenges of actually trying to pin down the impacts and their evaluation. Really difficult thing to do. Lastly, we spent some time reflecting on impact, and we identified three main elements to that. Accessibility. I've already covered part of this before. It was seen as being included in the team, provided again with plain English information, included in face-to-face meetings, working within a friendly, acceptable atmosphere, and finding that our contributions really mattered. In other words, we wanted to be part of a co-production. Sustained involvement. This included roles within the teams evolving as skills and knowledge grow, and a confidence to expand our involvement to other areas of research. For instance, having gained experience in one research team, perhaps I can use that experience and skills to other areas of research. Ensuring relevance. We live in a democracy. Well, okay. And the war cry for democracy is nothing about us without us. As taxpayers, of course, we pay for the research, which directly concerns us in one way or another, And we do need a say in how that research is carried out and actually pursued. We also need to understand, to be relevant, that a team is professional. And if we need to pursue relevance, we too need to be professional. First-class research is rarely done by individuals, it's done by teams. I'm a member of the research board at NIHR, and the first time I attended there was 20 academics around the table, and what really surprised me was the way that they could disagree on a research application and in fact, quite often a researcher would say, I scored this application very highly, but having listened to my colleagues, I would like to drop that score down. And that to me is professionalism, and that's what we need to reflect in PPI. These three impacts lead, if you like, to cultural change. Now, to me, cultural change and normalization is the holy grail of PPI. I imagine two scenarios. In one scenario, a researcher goes to a funder and says, I have this wonderful project, we're going to do some deep data mining, very data intense, but we're not going to use computers. And the funder would say, are you mad? You can't do that. Go away and come back when you have a realistic application. The other scenario is that the researcher, perhaps the same researcher, I don't know, comes to the funder and says, I have a wonderful application, it's going to impact directly on the public, but we're not going to use PPI. And the funder would say, are you mad? This is not how you do research. Go away and try a little bit harder. That to me is normalization and cultural change. And normalization and cultural change, colleagues, is what we do at Newcastle University. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much.
Remember to switch off microphone. Is that all right?
This was actually amazing. Thank you, Dave. So our last presentation this morning is from, and I'm going to try to say your name well, Nuria. So Nuria Radotria, and she's from the university, well, she's a researcher at the Agency of Health Quality and Assessment of Catalonia, and she will be presenting on the Catalan biomedical research context.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me in this such inspiring and impressive conference. I've been asked to talk about the Catalan experience on the evaluation of patient and public involvement. As Audrey said, I come from Barcelona. I work at the Agency for Health Quality and Assessment of Catalonia. The name is AQUAS. And I'm going to explain a little bit our experience on PPI. I must say I normally use the word public engagement. I know in English you have several words with slightly different meanings. In Catalan we only use one, which is participació ciutadana, and the closest translation is public engagement. So maybe I use wrongly the word, but I tend to say all the words you have in just only one. So, public engagement. So, probably, well, regarding our context, probably the most important thing on our context is that we are not an Anglo-Saxon country. So, public engagement is still at the beginning in our country. Our story starts back on 2014 when AQUAS, our agency, was collecting indicators for accountability purpose. Collecting indicators on gender, and we published a report of gender in research, indicators on productivity, and we published a report on science productivity, whatever. And public engagement started to be trendy. We had this RRA, Responsible Research and Innovation, coming from Europe, saying that we need to promote public engagement. We come from the RIA, the Research Impact Assessment field, and we had some lessons from LIA saying engagement facilitates, engagement increase research, impact research. And also, patient engagement was in its early stages. It is in its early stages yet in Catalonia, but there are some interesting, and there was some interesting experiences, initiatives made by enthusiastic researchers on public engagement, and well, they have some value there. So the policymaker, which is the Ministry of Health of the Catalan government, asked us to publish some report on public engagement. So we needed to measure public engagement in hospital research centers. We started a project, it was mid-2015, with the public-private partnership funding to measure public engagement in health research in Catalonia. The spoiler is that now we have changed our mission. In 2018, we don't want to collect indicators anymore, and we have decided to make this leading evaluation and to promote engagement. But this is the end of the presentation. So our first mission was to assess engagement in Catalonia, and we designed a three-step approach. First of all, we needed to understand or to know how engagement was measured internationally, and we planned to do a literature review in order to look for indicators of engagement of societal actors in health research. Then, of course, we needed to see what was going on in our country, in Catalonia, and we planned to do some focus groups in hospital research centers with just researchers, directors, managers, and science communicators of the research center. So we have the scientific point of view. And then after that, in the best scenario, we would choose some indicators in order to have this public engagement report and to do this whole assessment exercise in biomedical research in Catalonia. So in our international review, we found 47 engagement indicators, and we categorized them in 4 levels of engagement. I'm sure you know all these words I'm talking with, depending on if the engagement was about informing people, about consulting them, about involving them, or about co-creating things with them. And it was especially inspiring for us to find that indicators of public engagement were through the whole, we can find indicators through the whole research process. We are not used to this. So patient and public involvement was possible in all stages of the research process. When the research is planned, well, we designed this simple model where the research is planned, when the research is executed, or when the research is translated, is transferred. So patients can be involved in the government of a research, and we found indicators about engagement in the process of a strategy planning and definition, organization, and management. Patients can be involved also in financial issues, and we have indicators on that, on the research activity, and also patients have a role in disseminating results. This is our experience. And patients also can have a role in primary results, creating products and services. Also, we have these capacity building indicators on activities like training, stakeholders, etc. I'm not going to read the list of 47 indicators. We have published it on our webpage, but here you can see some examples. I'm going to read it because for example, some indicators on governance is number of stakeholders, representatives on centers, governance bodies. For example, an indicator on resources is funding obtained via crowdfunding or patient associations. Capacity building training activities focused on specific stakeholders, etc. So this is the interesting part. When looking at the relevance of indicators, we found that 17 of these 47 indicators were highly relevant, which is good news. When looking at the feasibility of these indicators, we found that only 6 out of 47 indicators were highly feasible. However, there were no recommended indicators because there were no indicators that were highly relevant and highly feasible. So we had a problem right there. Because, well, that was not the perfect scenario to do, because we think indicators must be mission-oriented, must be, well, take into consideration the context, the distortion they can have provoked. So maybe we think that was not the best approach to do, but we didn't throw in the towel. And we did those focus groups I told you before. And the results of these focus groups were that Catalan health research centers do not systematically promote engagement activities. That there are single initiatives that are especially focused on disseminating results and on patient funding. However, the scientific community agreed that patient involvement is beneficial, and there are some challenges to face. The benefits are that I said this is the scientific point of view, the point of view of the researchers, and they said that PPI can improve communication, can facilitate a relationship based on trust, can influence society, can help getting funding, can help also on priority setting, and can increase input. However, they were concerned on the challenges. They said it is an extra effort, and there are cost and time constraints. There are also tensions between the stakeholders. Different stakeholders can have different agendas and different interests, and so there's these power tensions between them. And the third and the fourth challenges, they are very similar, because they say that different stakeholders can have different kind of knowledge, different language, different information, and they need to develop communicative skills. So, right at this point, we realized it was useless to assess public engagement in Catalonia right at that moment. It was like 2016, right there. And we need to change our mission and to promote public engagement, to develop these communicative skills they say they miss, etc. This is why we have changed our mission, and right now we are co-creating workshops with different hospital research centers in Catalonia, putting in value all the existing initiatives on public engagement and identifying good practices. We want to create, that's one of our objectives next year, is to create a network of public engagement activities in Catalonia. We are also organizing activities with an advocacy purpose with young researchers, projects with PIs, with different stakeholders too. And for the first time, we're including patients in funding panels next January. So, and this is my last slide, our lessons learned is that stop measuring for a while at least, and in our context, I'm not saying this worldwide, and start promoting public engagement. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nuria. So it is time to open the space for discussion and questions. So, Zana, will we just open for all of you? So if you have questions, just raise your hand, and we'll try to get the mic to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julia Hamer-Hunt, I'm co-chair of the Patients and Research Group of the Oxford Health Biomedical Research Centre. It's a question to one of the earlier speakers. They said that patients and researchers should walk in each other's footsteps. I'd like to know how somebody without a major mental health condition can walk in somebody who has had a major health condition all their life's footsteps. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I must confess my knowledge of mental health issues is slim to non-existent. I meant it really as a general comment on how we need to understand where each other are coming from and the challenges and opportunities which we have. I do understand there are particular challenges. Perhaps another challenge is simply understanding how we actually cope and meet with mental health challenges, basically. That's about all I can say. I'm sorry.
I think it's also about how we do it. So I get a bit worried that involvement's been reduced to exchanging documents over email. And actually, I think it's about ongoing dialogue, continuous interaction with people, people to people, and actually you learn all the time in all those conversations. It's not a one-off event or a paper exercise.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I probably would see that in a very similar way. So I think it's probably a way of understanding each other a bit more, you know, and seeing sort of in each other's footsteps and bringing the worlds somewhat closer to each other, and ensuring that communication is actually happening in a meaningful way rather than probably tokenistic way, you know, and that exchange is happening in a transparent, meaningful way.
Okay, next question.
Hello, thank you very much. It's very interesting. I'm Vivian Coates from Northern Ireland. I have no doubt about the importance of PPI, but my question is this. In the endeavour to develop national strategies and guidelines and networks and professionalise PPI, is there a danger that we lose the unique essence of PPI?
Yes, I do think actually this is a very acute problem. I used to be very much against the idea of the professional patient or the professional member of the public. I did think they actually didn't exist. But in my travels around the PPI circuit, I have met some members of the public who actually do think they are mini researchers and take the language of research and express their ideas in the language of research, which quite often I don't understand. So yes, I do think there is a danger of becoming over-professionalised and you lose that public perspective. It's something we have to constantly guard against, and to remember we're there to represent, well not represent, but to express a public perspective. And that's, I think, is very important, and we need to keep that in mind. How you stop going on to the other side, I'm really not quite sure. I don't know.
I think there's also an issue about it getting very process heavy, and you get really stuck in, you know, setting up groups and making them work properly and blah, blah, blah. And actually, I thought your presentation was absolutely fantastic. You cut through all of that, and it's about culture change. And we can lose sight of all of that because we're so stuck in getting the groups working and getting it. So actually, I think we need to be focusing and remembering culture change and what that's all about.
Actually, I totally agree. This is a danger, and I'm not sure if the national strategy is the best solution. But I also agree that it might not depend only on enthusiasm of some kind of people, because we don't arrive to everybody with this strategy. So we need to do something more, at least in our context, even if this danger exists.
I think the strategy in itself is probably not, I don't see that necessarily as a danger, but I see what you make of it, you know, how you enact it. And I see it actually on a daily basis. Some of the, within our institution actually, you see some people are really enthusiastic and come on board very quickly with the PPI notion now, without really reflecting on it and understanding it very well, without even having engaged in a meaningful way. So they want the quick cookbook approach, you know, and saying, so I need to do this for my funder now, so just give me the rundown how I do it, you know, and that I find more dangerous, you know, and more complicated, so that we have these cookbook solutions. I think we need to have that culture, that openness of always innovating and finding new ways collaboratively, you know, how we do PPI.
My name's Susan Fortescue, and I've been involved with the PPI on a major 5-year project that's just drawing to a close, and I'm now involved in a research proposal for a project that will last for 6 years. So I am gathering experience of PPI and seeing where I can help. I tend to be involved in projects that, of which I have personal experience. My father had dementia, my mother had Huntington's disease, and so I focus on projects in those areas. I think the two areas in which I personally have been able to help are communication and dissemination. I get quite a lot of abstracts for projects in which I could be involved, and a lot of them, to be honest, I can't understand. I have 3 master's degrees. I'm not stupid. I have quite a lot of experience. Please, if you're writing an abstract, try to limit the number of acronyms. Try to work out if your acronyms are really necessary. Give it to a teenager to read. Try to make it interesting, make it motivating, make me want to participate in your project. So that's the communication side. The other side is the dissemination side. I really liked Mr. Kroll's avocado because the outer layer focused on things that lay people do. It had webinars, it had videos. The 2 projects I've been involved in have focused on the written word. More and more, the public don't read. They look at YouTube videos, they look at Facebook, they look at TV, they read things like Saga magazine, the WI magazine, as somebody mentioned to me today. Please think of ways of disseminating the very often interesting results of the research that you've been doing, because at the moment, it doesn't often get to the people who really could benefit from it. Thank you very much.
I think it was Einstein who once said, if you can't represent your research in one side of A4, which can be read by an 11-year-old child, put it in the bin and start again.
Hi, I'm Emma, I'm a researcher from university. First of all, amazing presentations from all of you, really interesting. Thank you very much for sharing. My question's for Nuria. I'm sorry if I missed it. You had that very interesting relevance and feasibility chart. How did you assess feasibility of an indicator? I'm interested in, I guess, with a lot of discussions around everything's possible if you just change methods, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, actually, I think I missed this information. We did a panel with evaluators, and we asked them what did they think about it, taking into account the data we have. So with the data we have and we can achieve, is this indicator feasible? That's it. There were 8 evaluators, so that they know the whole system and which kind of data we work with, and it was like their opinion. That's it.
More questions?
Thank you for the presentations. It refers to something that came up in Dave's presentation, but it's not a criticism of Dave in any sense. So it was shown that the workshop that he did had an average age of 69.5. I think that this is probably something that's quite representative across PPI in the UK more generally. And I think what it demonstrates is this overburden of PPI work on people who are retired and in later age, because PPI tends to be underfunded in the UK. And I think it would be interesting to hear the panel comment on, and critically comment on, what this might do, how we might get more money for engaging with different and more diverse people. And this is obviously not to undermine the contributions of people in later life. Of course, I want to become a person in later life myself. But I think it is important to illustrate that actually a lot of the time we've got a convenient sample here, and it is a convenient sample. It's the cheapest population for researchers to engage with.
Right. I can simply say I wholeheartedly and absolutely agree with what you said. I think you're perfectly right. There's too many people like me in research. I think what you need to do is some fairly radical thinking. I mean, I outlined that in the soapbox session I had, is get yourself a stall in the street and speak to people in the street and talk to them about research and give them training and give them an easy, seamless pathway into research. Get down on the street where people are. That's where we should be, not in the highest, well, I say higher, not in the strata where I exist on.
Yeah, and I think there's an issue about not trying to do diversity by the numbers. So we try and have some kind of sample that's representative of something. I have rarely seen that work well. I think for me the key issue is who has the relevant experiential knowledge to contribute to the context of a particular project, a particular issue. And sometimes that's not about age, sometimes that's about the stage of disease, sometimes that's about whether you're housebound or you can travel. It's all sorts of things that we need to pay more attention to, and I think we need to sort of focus on that a bit more as well as increasing diversity.
Very briefly, I think it's massively complex. I think I don't have any answers, because I think the meaningfulness has to be there, the experience that's linked, but who defines then, that experience as relevant? And I think I would probably, I have a problem sometimes with sort of the professionalization of, I think as it was mentioned earlier, of PPI in terms of having people for many, many years as experts on panels, who advise, because you don't get the diversity and you get a transformation of that role into a professional role, which is different. I think there needs to be that openness to invite, to go out, as was said, go out into the street, as David said, and meet people out there, look out for diversity, find meaningful ways of engaging there as well, not being just in the university. And reflecting on the mechanisms, I guess, of how to engage in a meaningful way for particular purposes at a given time, and having that diversity in mind, and I think that's what we're trying to look at, what are the seldom heard groups, where are the voices in the margin, and pushing that envelope all the time, and being innovative in the mechanisms that we engage with, and not saying we have that box ticked. I think we have to live with that ambiguity and that fluidity over time.
Hello, my name is Antoine from Canada. I'd like to thank you for this very interesting session. I have to say, from a psychological perspective, this conference has been very comforting. Feeling that no matter where we live, we face common challenges, and energizing feeling that there are many of us trying to make a step forward. My question is about the potential value of reaching out to colleagues and citizens outside of healthcare to tackle the challenge of evaluation of public involvement. And I was inspired by Thilo's initial idea of reaching out to Campus Engage when they face the issue of evaluation, and also Dave's comment that engaging as a patient or public member in health research increases capacity to engage in a more broadly in a democratic society. Personally, one of the more profound papers that I found on evaluation of public involvement were written by people like Rowe and Frewer, who work in the Institute of Food Research. And there's lots of thinking done in political science around participative democracy and design for co-design and international development for community engagement, science and society, etc., etc. So what do you think would be the value for us to reach out to people in those areas?
I've been talking to colleagues in the environmental field, and there are some overlaps. Say, for example, I'm thinking of a piece of research on how farmers use pesticides, and the assumption was that they all kind of did it perfectly when they mixed up the solution, but actually they put their hands in and they don't wear the protective clothing. So looking at the risks of pesticide for farmers, you actually need to know practically the reality of how they work. So there's that kind of issue. But I think there's something unique and special about what we're doing, which is about patients having experiential knowledge of and being an expert in their condition. And that's not there in the environmental field in quite the same way. And I think it's about how we distinguish between when we need public and when we need patient, and why. And I think that needs a bit more unpacking and thinking through. And I don't think it's the same as citizen engagement. I think it's something quite different, and that needs more work, I think.
Well, I believe that maybe this is faith. I believe that when you talk to other people that they have not learned what you have learned, that they have not been taught what you have taught, it can always enrich the discussion. So that's what I think. I know.
Well, I think the jury is still out, and I think I hear, Christina, what you were saying also about patients and particular conditions. The question is, what are the questions at hand? Who defines them? What's meaningful? And who are the patients as well? What matters to patients? Patients are not a cancer patient is not a cancer patient. A cancer patient is someone, a person, an individual with lives around it. Their complex lives, their socioeconomic differences, their ethnic differences, their cultural differences, where these people are. So I struggle sometimes with the patient rep on an advisory committee because I don't know if it's the white middle class male advising on a project, or is it, as Mary pointed out yesterday, Mary Galvin, saying, so what about that homeless adult who is lying in the street and who has multiple conditions, to manage? So what are we looking at, I think, is important. And I think opening it up to a wider lens sometimes, I think, is necessary to understand the complexities of lives. And secondly, I would say, what we can learn from colleagues who are not in the health field. I think the innovation, I think, in engagement and the mechanisms comes from fields that are not traditionally health-related. They're coming from the social science, from anthropology, they're coming from sociology, from a variety of fields, from design, through design thinking, and that's where we need to look. I think this is inherently, I think health and social care research is inherently an interdisciplinary agenda, and I think we probably need to engage more with those colleagues across the board, as well as with diverse publics.
And one final question, thank you.
Thank you. Tony Bewley from the Faculty of Health and Social Care at Edge Hill University. I chair the Service User Carer Group there. It's for Dave. Dave, you mentioned about payment and about considering people on benefits. Now, I passionately believe that we should value people for the roles that they're doing, and as our staff are paid, we pay our service users as well. And I feel that the service users, it's up to them then to think about their financial, because no one asked me about my financial situation. So do you do things in a different way, or can you suggest things in a different way?
I've always had the opinion that, as far as I'm concerned, if someone wants time, then I will certainly accept it. I would never ask for payment. If payment's not offered, then I certainly wouldn't insist. I do think it's a personal choice whether you accept payment or not. I always look at other people in a meeting, perhaps, or perhaps when I go to board and I see academics sitting around the board, I think, well, they're not actually getting docked 2 days' pay for sitting there, so why shouldn't I get paid for my considerable time and considerable effort? But I do agree that benefits and taxes are a real problem, and it's something that needs to be sorted out, I think.
Well, thank you to everyone who's presented this morning, and thank you for the insightful questions as well. So with that, can we just have a final appreciation of our four speakers who have been. So now to the break, and looking forward to even more exciting things happening today. So thank you.